My work in international development started out when I began volunteering for Engineers Without Borders. They had come to our consulting firm in New York, and they were looking for volunteers to go and do water projects and sanitation projects in Kenya, Latin America. So got involved with them, started working on installing wells and keeping people's water supplies clean, and our water projects quickly all became toilet projects because the principal cause for lack of quality water, potable water in developing countries is human waste getting into the water supply. So I started working on pit latrines and focusing on flood-prone areas, which are particularly hard for people to have toilets installed there because there's no possibility of infrastructure in the ground. You can't have a piping system that's underground without having pumping stations, and it just gets very complicated. So we were in El Salvador actually installing above ground concrete vault latrines, which is the go-to technology. It's pretty much the only technology that works in those areas, and we couldn't get any materials in because the roads got washed out. So we were half a dozen engineers in the mountains, and we had to come up with an alternative solution. And I actually thought of the composting toilet that I had installed at my cabin in Vermont a bunch of years back because we couldn't put in a septic system for the same reason, because the water table is too high. And I'd been using it for years, and it actually is very simple. I just took it apart before I installed it, and it's a spinning drum inside of a box. And coincidentally, the technology actually comes from Scandinavia. It's a resilience to permafrost. It's a technology that was developed in Sweden because you couldn't dig in the permafrost, in the frozen ground, and you couldn't have a septic system that would leach and that would percolate the wastewater into the ground. So they actually had the most advanced composting toilets in Scandinavia, and then they went over to Canada and started manufacturing there, and that was actually the version of the toilet I bought. And I said, we could make this here in El Salvador using local materials because it's very basic. And we were able to make a prototype in 3 days, and then when I came back to the US, I started Toilets for People to give people in developing countries the opportunity or the option that I had to go online and Google waterless toilet and see what came out. In developing countries, they don't have any options other than this one very cumbersome concrete vault latrine, which you need to source concrete, and it's very labor intensive. It takes weeks to build, and it's expensive. And it's actually also difficult to maintain because when you fill up one of the chambers, basically it's a 2-chamber system. You fill up one of the chambers, and then you move to the other one, and then by the time you fill up that one, you go back to the first, and you're supposed to use that as fertilizer. But it's a cubic meter of waste, so you imagine like a ton of waste trying to dig a hole to bury that or find a way to use that. And also people have an aversion to handling human waste, which I get. And people have an aversion also, by extension, buying food and eating food that's made with human waste because the perception is that it's going to taste like shit. And it's hard to break through that, honestly. So we steer very clear of that. So when people use our toilets, they have to empty that once every 2 months. It falls into a plastic bin at the bottom of the unit. You take it outside, you dig a shallow hole, you bury it, cover it with wood ash as a neutralizing agent just to make sure there's no pathogens left in there, and then you cover it with dirt and you're done. And if you wanted to plant a tree or a bush or a rose, a shrub there, then it would actually do really well. But we don't lead with the reuse of the human waste compost for any beneficial purposes because people just have a natural, I think, gut aversion, and we don't want to engage in that kind of attempted behavior change. We just want to bring toilets for people. So that's sort of why we call ourselves what we call ourselves, because we stay really focused on the primary goal.